Imperialism. The world of 1900 was one in which the more industrialized state had power over the people and resources of the unindustrialized world. Many inhabitants of the industrialized countries believed that the colonial was benefit for the countries that were being ruled and that the inhabitants of the backward country were being civilized by foreign rule. Liberals in the ruling countries were divided over how the dominance of the power country over the colonial should be maintained. Not everyone through the direct political rule was necessary, but none were willing to get go to benefit of the colonialism and the control over resources in the colonial. In Germany, the liberal argued that their country industrial power depended on taking more colonial. In the US, many liberals said that their country had no more right to rule over Cubans and Latin America, British, French, German, Belgian, and America capitalistic invested heavily in economic activity both within the outside the former empire. They are supported as well. They are supported as well as influenced the foreign policies of their respective countries and pushed for a colonial domination of the rest of the world countries comprising Africa, Latin America, and Asia. The political groups in 1900 that had the most consistent anti-imperialistic view were the socialistic who believed that colonialism benefit only the ruling class everywhere and was not in the interest of the working people anywhere. Therefore, the working classes of the all countries needed to unite to overthrow his imperialistic domination by a few countries. Nationalism. Nationalism and national liberalization ideology was an explosive force in the world of the 19th and 20th century in all parts of the world. In 1900, completing nationalistic flourished and become important form of mobilization of people. A broader notation of civilization identify completed with nationalistic winning support of the people. Both were important in Asia and Africa. Pan all Af- Africanism and pan Islamic fused freedom struggle in colonies. The Chinese and Indian emphasize their culture and independence as well as opposition to colonial policies in their struggle for freedom. Popular participation to government was also an important as well as perfect of national movement protest against colonial policies of the imperial construction. uh, Liberal movement all over the world. Most national freedom struggles of the 20th country, 20th century, others engaged with idea about democracy and also with idea of how national wealth should be produced and shared. In a contrast within the industrialized imperialistic countries, nationalism become aggressive and lead with support to colonial policies and domination of other countries, which as well as their your country, your study of the following units lead to intense competition among those countries and eventually World War First. What you have learned. The century before 1900 was a period of rapid population growth with the uh, most striking growth occurring in Europe and North America. Population growth in these places occurred in tandem with industrialization, the emergence of industrial society lead to formation and solidification of ideology, sets of idea, sets of idea and principles about achievement of the desired social order. By 1900, ideologies was be beginning to shape the struggle of people in non-industrial societies for liberal exposure from empire in particular nationalism and socialism were to have an explosive impact within developed Europe as well as the undeveloped colonial world. Ideologies and political mobilization in the developed and undeveloped worlds. The world of 1900 saw a tremendous growth of ideas and completely ideologies or various sets of political ideas about life and organization of societies. This was to a large extent the result of economic and social transformation connected with industrialization, the debates become widespread and different ideologies begin to have mass of following and organizing due to the rise of print culture and other means of communication. By 1900, print of media in Western countries and in many colonial are uh, well were producing information and advertising products and services to large number of people, but also shaping their political views. Liberalism liberalism as a set of idea began to emerge more than 300 years ago when nobles and people of substantial property, sometimes joined by poorer people, struggle to regulate or limit the power of the rulers. Liberal believe that individual has some natural rights, including the right to resist operation, accumulated property, freedom of religion, right to express their opinion freely, and so on. They believe that government and rulers must to be have respect these rights. The thought formula- formulation of public law and constitutions were the best method of creating and enforcing these rights. These rights and constitutional were the best safeguard against arbitrary exercise of power of rulers and government machinery. They also objected to state authority dictating the religion, growth of people, growth of popular movements. Liberalism was forced to acknowledge of the extension of these included right to form organization and participate in elections. Liberalism is also connected with certain economic ideas. Liberals saw people as an economic agent, as a producer and consumer of goods and services. They saw these as important aspect of their personalities and self-expression of individual, but to them it was not the liberal but the profit-seeking merchant, shopkeepers and manufacturers who were the heroes. Adam Smith, one of the major spoke, spokespersons, interest would contribute of common good. Economic activity it left to be on create its own set of supply and demand, and this leads to famine in society. They argued for free trade, so for economy, the best government is that which governed least and leaves everything to the market operations. By 1900, many liberals began to think that government should intervene in a minimum fashion by introducing some welfare measures uh, for the poorer society, like interest of property people. Liberal brought their main support from professional and educated people who were dissatisfied with traditional arbitrary ar- arrangements which uh, ensured privileges on basis of birth, noble lineage, and of the business and industry capitalistic. They also won support of many working people who liked their argument about constitutional and individual rights, but didn't understand that they were not at all keen on economic equality or economic right of the working people. Conservation. Conservation came mainly from land owning and other section of society who didn't like the abolition of privileges and restriction which benefited them. They were from nobles which were lost due to free trade policies. For them, the whole idea of natural right was disruptive because it destroyed the old tradition order in society in which each section of society already had its place to them. Social order and stability were more important than equality. They felt that while all may be equal before God, it was not desirable that it should be so in the real world as well. They saw the old social order as the best defense against the cause of the modern who world which was causing upheavals had conflict in society. All the Western states had a strong conservation political group who participated in elections and had influence in the administration machinery. Socialism. Socialism also uh, criticized the liberal for the things that for the things very different from the conservatives. The societies the socialistic representation the interest of working people and argued that had been replaced by that of the proprietary capitalistic. Some earlier socialists such as Louis Blanc and Robert Owen believed that cooperative or producer would lead to more equal sharing of profit. Others like Karl Marx thought that workers would never be fairly rewarded under the capitalistic system. This would happen only if all enterprises were commonly owned society, when all means of production were held in common and were not private property. Each person will contribute according to his her capacity and receive according to his her needs. Social justice therefore required abolition of private property. Classes would also cease to exist in a society which was equal. According to him, the unlimited goal of the socialistic movement was the establishment of such society. Marx also said that uh, since the ruling classes would not cooperative in this revolution was necessary, this should communistic parties and strong and community working class movement. Thus, the social democratic Marxistic party in 1900 organized millions of workers into labor union clubs and association, participated in election and held a huge block of seat in the reciting German parliament. They were able to get passed legislation to improve the lives of the working Marxistic, socialistic, and the labor parties existed in the many parts of the world by 1900. Though they were under tremendous surveillance by the government and policies of the country who wanted to prevent and known socialistic were imprisoned or exiled, as happened to Lenin, a leader of the Russian revolution movement. Good morning, everyone. Welcome in RN Q&A classes, chapter number 22. The word in 19th century legacy. When we learn about the past through books, films, televisions, or the stories told by the older people, we notice the differences and similarities between other times and our own. We are aware that certain material things and technologies that we use today either did not exist in 1900 or were used only by small numbers of people. Yet, in terms of the organization of human life, we have much in common with the people of the year 1900. This unit will discuss how people in various parts of the world lived in 1900. Objectives. After studying the lesson, you will be able to visualize population pattern in different regions of the world in 1900. Define capitalistic industrialization and understand its social consequences. Explain relations of colonialism, visualizing modern pattern of energy and resources use, and analyzes an emergence of modern political ideologies and mobilization. Structure of world population 1900. The study of human population, their rates of growth and shifting pattern of settlements is called demography. In 1900, the human population was about 1.5 million, 150 crore. China and India were then as a today the most populous countries, yet in 1900 Asia contained a smaller portion of the world population than it does today. Most of the people all over the world were settled agriculturistic in 1900, which cultivated crops and animals and lived in villages. In many parts of the world, people existed as normal grazing herd of animals, and many were tribal hunter-gatherers, although they formed a smaller number in 1900 than a few hundred years easily earlier. A steadily growing section of the world population lived in cities. Cities had existed since ancient time in many parts of the world, but they were limited in size and population. However, capitalistic industrialization lead to urbanization and faster growth of population in cities. By 1900, Europe has a larger concentration of cities than any other region in the world. More than 100 cities had a population of least 1 lakh people, and the weak 6 European cities with about 10, uh, 10 lakh thousand inhabitants. European and American had the largest cities, where in Asia and Africa, large expansion of the territory contained a few cities, and many stagnated and declined uh, compared hundreds of years earlier. Most of the large cities outside of Europe in 1900 were only 100 or 200 years old, like Sydney and Chicago, and were inhabited mostly by people of European origin. Some, like Calcutta in Bengal, grew under British rule. In general, human population of Asia and South America in 1900 were 75 to 95% rural or living in villages and independent on agriculture. Industrialization Europe or Americas and Australia were people of European origin had settled, either already had or were close to having 50% urban population living in towns and cities. Industrialization and social classes. The process of industrialization began in Western Europe after about 1700 with bringing together of large number of laborers near area of energy and resources to produce metal and to operate machines that turn out finished products at a fast pace. By 1900, when big amounts of money began to required for industry to operate on a big scale, we see the growth of capitalistic industrialization. Capitalism derives from the word capital, meaning accumulated wealth and property, and those people who have capital and called capitalists. Capitalists were directly engaged in industry, production, trading, administration, and banking. By 1900, most of Europe, America, and Australia had undergone capitalistic industrialization. The wealth and property of capitalistic came either from trade and commerce or from expropriatory and property of small owner. On the other hand, were people, men, women, and children who worked in factories and who didn't have any property and were dependent for their livelihood on their labor for which they got wages. Between them was a large majority which even in 1900 was not propertyless wage earners but which could not be called wealthy. Many were members of the salaried middle classes, teachers, doctor, engineer, clerk, and in other services. Most people by then also believed that existence of such classes is normal and would continue to remain so, and that the majority of people would accept these inequality as their situation improved. They saw that the transfer of wealth from colonies would allow some benefits to go to the working people as well as in the European countries. This did happen to some extent by 1900, and most people lived better than their grandparents had. But there were also different periods of unemployment. By 1900, Asian and African cities like Bombay, Shanghai, and Dhaka also contained large number of businessmen, shopkeepers, and other sections of middle classes as well as industry wages laborers. But population here was greatly outnumbered by landholders, peasant and agricultural laborers in the surrounding villages. It is important to keep in mind few others fact about capitalistic society in 1900. Much of the raw material and markets for European economic came from the colonies, and this relationship was also one of equal inequality. It was not an equal trading relationship within European societies. Landlords were no longer the dominant classes. Urban and knowledge. Uh, Urbanism and knowledge. Another characteristic of industrialization was not production and sharing of knowledge in society become more closely connected than before with urban life. Cities and towns were not only concentration of industrial wage laborers, they also had growing number of people engaged in job requiring education and literacy, clerk, manager, teacher, government officials, etc. Soon it began to be recognized that even industry work with literary and numeracy contributed greater efficiency. Newspaper and magazines contribution to it. Daily production newspaper in 1900 exceeding 1 million copies in cities like London, Paris, Berlin, and New York. By 1900, most industrial societies required that both boys and girls receive basic education at least up to the age of 13 or 14. School teaching become one of the modern profession in which women participated in large number. There, there across knowledge and culture gap between urban and rural people as a whole. Adult literacy in some Western societies by 1900 was between 60% and 90%, while it was much less in Northwestern societies. Energy and resources use industrial versus non-industrial area in the world of the world. In 1900, not only did people in the industrialized and non-industrialized world produce different things, they developed very different pattern of energy use. Most production in the non-industrial world in 1900 was derived by human and animal power, uh, even on American farms, plows and mechanical harvesters were drawn by horses, as were carts, carriages, and buses in the town. Industrial society required new energy sources to run their factories, light their homes and office, and power modern means of transport such as railway engine and automobile. Thus, Britain, France, and Germany in 1900 were largely coal-powered societies, while the Italy had begun to be used hydroelectricity as was relying increasingly on petroleum fuels. By 1915, it was clear that cars would replace houses in transportation. These countries began to realize that their economic and political strength depend on sources of energy, and they began to exploit resources in their colonies. For example, the British were engaged in oil in Assam and Murabba and Burma. The Dutch were doing the same in Samudra and the American in Mexico. These factors determined that the foreign policies, colonialism, economic pattern, and social relations. Most industrial nations of the Western world in 1900 directly ruled in control economically territories for beyond their own boundaries. Britain ruled over most of while Holland ruled over the entire area that it was now Indonesia, France, Britain, Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Belgium had colonial in Africa, Japan, China. These colonial rulers tried to prevent Asian and African from acquiring advanced technology and carefully controlled railway and telegraph network in their colonies. They also came down heavily on aspiration for freedom. They replaced the earlier with the aim of assembling some section of colonial society with the foreign rule. They also prepared some section of them for manning the colonial administration at lower level. They practiced policies of divide and rule, restricted development of modern economic activity, and used education for purpose of creating a society gulf between those educated in the colonial languages and those in the local languages. The impact of colonial and capitalism present penetration altered social relation in the colonial rule, altered the pattern of agriculture to shift its priorities towards the cash crop. They might trade in the pattern of the production. The export was greatly expanded during the 19th and early 20th century. For example, Indian peasant produced opium and British entrepreneur exported to China. India merchant to had in this in order words both production and trade were geared to the interest of the ruling power. As a result, large number of people around the world came to produce things that they didn't themselves consume while they consumed things produced elsewhere by others. Such commercial pattern created independence but also dependencies because of the hold of the ruling power. Peasants in many areas lost food sufficiency with the result, and although the total world production food was higher than ever before in history, the late 19th century famine killed millions of people.